Welcome to the Rich Outdoors, where we break down the tips, tactics, and strategies of hunting's greats to not only help you become better hunters, but to motivate and inspire you between hunting adventures. For more about us, including additional resources on our guests and links to everything we cover in the interview, check out therichoutdoors.net. Hey guys, welcome to episode 4 of the Rich Outdoors podcast. Today, we have a great interview for all of you elk fanatics out there. And let me tell you, by the end of this, you'll be asking, is it September yet? So join me as we sit down with Jason Phelps of Phelps Game Calls to pick apart his take on elk calls and his tactics that he uses in September. Jason is not only an amazing elk caller on the competition stage, but has had great success in the woods as well, to include his 359-inch Roosevelt that you'll hear all about calling in and actually missing the day before taking the bull of a lifetime. So let's dive into the interview. Hey, Jason, welcome to the Rich Outdoors podcast. How are we doing?
Excellent. How are you doing, Cody?
Not too bad, not too bad. I'm definitely ready for September, and talking elk hunting is not going to help that situation at all.
No, this is the worst time of the year because you're about as far away from September as you can get. You got 6 months behind you and 6 months ahead of you, and it's tough.
And the worst part is now is when I start really shooting my bow, and that does not help me longing for September anymore.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So, want to break into a lot of talk about elk hunting and calling and whatnot. But for those guys who don't know who you are and kind of what you do, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe how you got started in hunting and even just hunting elk?
Okay. Yeah, my name is Jason Phelps. I am the owner of Phelps Game Calls, located here in Southwest Washington. You know, we kind of tailor more to, I want to say like the handmade, kind of custom-made diaphragms, but things are becoming a little too busy and we're making some changes. But we kind of got our start making wood elk calls, the external cow calls, and I thought it was just going to be a hobby. So I started, I bought a lathe, bought some wood, all the tools I needed, and set up a room out in my garage and started making them, and then started getting orders and more orders, and things grew. And then, being a diehard elk hunter already, I knew that diaphragms was kind of the next stage. So I started doing the research I needed. Well, how do you make diaphragms? Where do you get the materials from? What do I got to come up with? And so we slowly started. After 2 years of selling just the wood external cow calls, we kind of dove head into the diaphragm making, and I've been making diaphragms since 2011. And really enjoy it. Really enjoy the interaction, getting feedback on the calls, or just having somebody like our buddy Matt call up and say, I want this, and this in a call, and being able to go and make that call that works perfect for him. I love that side of it. And, as far as getting my elk hunting start, probably like the majority of guys, my dad has 4 brothers and a grandpa that, elk hunting that's what it was. We went and deer hunted, the kids got to go, but when it was elk season, the kids got left at home, and it was time for the guys to, jump in the timber and go do what they do. And so there was always kind of that mystery of what is different from deer hunting to elk hunting. And I think it was my 7th or 8th grade year I finally got to buy a muzzleloader tag. And I think that was kind of the thing of what's so special about elk hunting that we don't get to go until we're 7 or 8. And then I realized the way that they had rifle hunted, they would maybe glass a cut for the first half hour and then be out of the truck until dark.
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, that's almost identical to mine. Is I grew up deer hunting, with my dad and uncles and whatnot, and then I think it was 4th grade was the first year we got to go, and when my brother and I, and then you get to go, and so there was always this mystique or mystery about elk camp,
Yeah, and there was. We'd be at school and they'd bring the bulls through town, and I can remember seeing them up at the gas station outside of school, and man, I want to do that. But my family was traditionally always rifle and muzzleloader. Around here, even when I started, bow hunting and getting into it around the late 90s, there was nobody. I mean, you literally had the woods to yourself when I first started. And so the way I kind of got involved in elk calling, local sporting goods store here, I went and bought a Primos Terminator and like a 3-pack of pallet plate reeds, the white, red, and blue one. I can't remember. I know the ivory plate's the white one. I can't remember the red and the blue. And it would have been our day before archery. We just drove up in the woods, and we're doing some scouting. It was me and my girlfriend at that time. She's now my wife, and then my dad and my uncle. And we pulled up on a landing, and there was a herd about 100 yards away, and the cows scurried in the timber. And not knowing anything about anything, I let a bugle off just because there were elk there, and got a response from down in the timber. We didn't see the bull, and after about 15 minutes, I'd called the bull, and he had just walked right back out within 20 yards of the landing, bugling the whole way, doing their thing. And I can remember my uncle jumped up and kind of scared him away at 20 yards. We didn't know. He was he's starting to get nervous and kind of scared, waving his hands at it. And
how old were you when you first picked up an elk reed? That
was my junior year in high school, so I'd have been 98.
So was it just sheer magic coming out of that thing out of the beginning, or were you like everyone else? And
that was a blue reed. That was straight out of the Terminator too. But I was decent enough on the diaphragms, but I remember exactly on that calling, it was basically just straight blue Terminator. So yeah, we called that bull in. Then the next morning was archery opener. And with nobody archery hunting, I never thought about I shouldn't be out here messing with the bulls. So opening morning, we went back out to the similar area, and I called in a giant, for us, 6x7 Roosevelt bull in opening day archery to like 40 yards. And I looked at my dad and I'm like, why did we not bow hunt? And then come to find out that first year I actually did bow hunt. I called in a ton of bulls, but I think I missed 6 or 7 bulls my very first year. And that was just, I was under the mentality, well, I got a bow, I can hit a point at 20 yards, and went out with my bow, and soon realized that there's a lot more that goes into, practicing year round and getting ready and preparing myself.
You have to have so many failures before you ever have any kind of success. There's just such a learning curve. But what is it about elk calling that drives you so much? And what do you find the most passion in with elk calling?
I joke with my wife. It's like not playing God, but essentially controlling nature. You're out there and you're completely in control of an animal by basically fooling them, and it's part of that. And then also just the adrenaline rush to have 1,000-pound animal screaming at you from sometimes 20 or 30 yards away is just, it's intense. And that's kind of what gets me. Ultimately, like growing up, we rely on it. Not like it's survival, but we've essentially relied on elk and deer meat all year long since I've been 4 or 5 years old. We don't buy hardly any red meat from the store, and so that's kind of part of it. But the part that really draws me in is just the excitement and the thrill of calling in an animal that's 4 or 5 times bigger than you are, and essentially controlling nature for a small second.
So do you still get the heebie-jeebies when that bull comes screaming in, or are you kind of over that now?
It depends. It kind of depends on how long I've got before it happens, and kind of leading up to it. I'll kind of go a little side story on the biggest blacktail buck I've ever shot. I just happened to jump it and then shot it with no problem because I didn't have any time. But last year I can remember glassing up a little 2-point as daylight was. And I was trying to draw more horns on him. I was so nervous by the time it would have been time to shoot that I don't know if I would have ever made the shot. So I always kind of, it just depends if a bull's on you right away, or if, he comes around a piece of brush and he's there, or if I can see him for 200 yards coming through the timber and kind of, I'm not going to lie, I still get a huge adrenaline rush, and I'm never fully under, I don't got ice flowing through my veins that much, but like the Idaho bull I killed this year, I didn't see him until he was at 6 yards. And so I really wasn't that excited. I was talking myself through anchoring, center your pin guard, basically just able to talk myself through it instead of being scatterbrained like I am sometimes.
Yeah, those times where it takes 2-3 hours of working up that bull and so close. Those are the times where you let those nerves settle in, or get the best of you, I should say. But so what experience do you have? What's your number one experience for just outstanding of calling in an elk and that adrenaline rush? You got one that stands above and beyond the rest of them?
Yeah, I mean, of course, everything always comes back to my big bull in 2012. We didn't know he was there until we spotted him, like literally 15 minutes before I blew on a call. I wasn't even set up to be the shooter. I had set up in the trail and sent my buddy Derek down into shooting, in the shooting position, and started calling. And we knew how big this bull was from across the way, and we knew that he was, an upper echelon type bull. And I started calling, and like they sometimes do, the cows kind of decided to go the other way, and we could hear him respond, and kind of played the game perfect and called him into. Well, ultimately it was only 45 yards, and Derek had kind of pigeonholed himself in behind a layer of trees and never could get a shot. He was only like 10 yards from the bull. I had no shot, and the bull stood there for about a minute and a half, bugling, looking, checking on.
It felt like an hour.
Cows. Yeah, it felt like an hour. And it became obvious Derek probably wasn't going to get a shot, and that bull took a step back towards his cows, and I ended up guessing him for 55 because I wasn't even supposed to be the shooter, and shot right over his back on the first time I had called him in. And that was probably my coolest calling, just because you hear a lot the guys that kill these giant bulls, you can't call them in; they need to be snuck up on, and to be able to call a bull in of that size. Was kind of the one that I hang my hat on. And then I ended up missing him that day, and we ended up getting a chance at him the next day and finally sealing the deal. But
so did you get a look at that bull before you started calling to him?
I did. It was you talk about signs, but he was on the top of a ridge top. The sun was gleaming off of him. He had a pure gray background, and he was just standing there in all of his glory. And I actually spotted him with a cow earlier. I had spotted a cow right off the bat, and you've only got so big a field of view in your binoculars. And as I was watching that cow, you could see tine start to come out of like the right side of your. It was just it was almost surreal watching it all happen. And then we lost him. By the time I got Derek over there to see the bull that I had just spotted, he was gone. And then about 2 minutes later, that bull skylined himself, and it was just. At that point, I wasn't trying to look at the horns or put a number to it. I just knew it was a giant.
So I want to get into elk behavior, and I want to get into calling and all this great stuff, but I got one question about that particular bull or that situation. How does your calling strategy change when you see that bull and he's that big, and in the back of your head you're like, you can't call to this bull? Does it change that, or did you go about it 100% the same as if you didn't see him?
Yeah, you can call it stubborn hard-headedness, but I basically go into every situation the same. In 2011, super aggressive tactics, because the night before I had a herd bull in there. We had a herd bull bugling, and I'm just ripping like I'm trying to call this herd bull in close to his cows, in tight, and out comes a little small raghorn. I ended up killing that bull. And I use that same strategy over and over. I try to keep the same thing for pretty much every situation. We'll make changes on the fly, but that's one of those things, like, it's almost hard to talk about until you're in the situation. If you hear something or you're getting some feedback from a bull, we may make a change, but I pretty much go real aggressive most of the time unless something leads me to do something different.
Well, let's dive in, or we can dive into that a little bit more, but I want to talk about elk behavior for a minute. And There's a lot of myths or misnomers about elk behavior. I feel like you said, every situation is different. But what are some of the biggest myths or misnomers you hear about elk behavior?
Elk behavior. We touched on already being able to call in big herd bulls, and I think I'll kind of take it. I don't want to get outside elk behavior, but I think there's some reasons that people kind of come to a conclusion on elk behavior, by making the wrong sounds at the wrong time and doing some stuff not necessarily wrong because it may work, but the majority of the time, if you're calling your way into a bull, you're going to say, well, you can't call a big herd bull in because you're always pushing them away. Well, if you didn't call your way in, so that's one thing that all these people talk about not being able to call a herd bull, but if you wait and basically locate them and then wait until you're 70 to 80 yards away from a herd bull, I almost guarantee that you're going to get a chance to look at that bull.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the bar. We use the bar scenario in some of my seminars, and if there's just you walk in the bar and there a guy in the corner, big huge guy with his lady friend, and the guy's just a giant, and he kind of knows it. He may if you're kind of yelling at him from across the room, he may just have the chance to get up and walk out. But if you wait till you get 5 feet from his table and scream at his face, he doesn't have much choice besides defend his harem or basically lose her. And so that's kind of the scenario we use. And I personally have never got that close to a herd bull and not at least seen him or had a chance, whether we've screwed up or not got a shot or not had a shooting lane. But every time we've been able to glass a herd bull or know that it's a herd bull and use some of these tactics and got within that 70 to 80 yard range, we've been able to call those bulls in. One of the big local misnomers is that you can't call a Roosevelt elk in. And it's true. Some of these areas down here around the gates are, I killed my biggest bull literally 2 minutes from my house. We have some, we're right up against timbered land here. So some of these elk down low aren't very callable because everybody's driving around messing with them. And, but if you can find unpressured elk around here, we've had days where, by 10 o'clock in the morning, we've been on 8 different bulls, in a couple different drainages, all bugling.
So what's your thoughts on overcalling as it pertains to elk behavior? I mean, you see a lot of bulls or a lot of people overcalling, and then these bulls are shutting up. But there's also a lot of argument that if you're not locating a bull, you're not going to be able to find him. So where's the happy medium there?
I kind of split it, and challenge, to me there's a difference between using location bugles and challenge bugle. There's a completely different, when I'm using a location bugle versus using challenge bugle, I'm kind of completely trying to send a different message. So I don't believe you can over-locate bugle, and I kind of, whether it's every 200 yards probably, and that may even be too spread out. I'm trying to bugle every 200 yards at least on a ridge line, on a trail, on a road system, and trying to locate, because a lot of times, you'll move 200 or 400 yards ahead. Now you get an answer directly below where you last located. I can't tell you why or what triggers them, but sometimes, just moving off or bugling at them from a different direction, maybe it allows them to hear it, or they didn't want to answer when they were, were that close to them. So I don't believe. Absolutely.
I think mood and temperament have a lot to do with that too. I mean, that bull has a personality, and depending on his personality and his mood, it changes a lot of things.
Yeah. And so my friends always joke with me that I just like to hear myself bugle, but I do bugle a ton, especially if we don't have something going or if we're trying to locate. But as soon as you locate something, the game's completely changed for me. I'm now completely silent until I get to within 80 to 100 yards. So I'd say I call a lot more than most guys do, and that's part of the fun for me. If I can't, I'd almost rather go find a different bull that's willing to play the game the way I want to than try to force something with a quiet bull or a bull that's playing hard to get and kind of makes it tough, because that's the excitement for me, is being able to call them in and get some interaction.
No, I think there's definitely something to be said. I've located bulls and been able to tell that they're not very hot, or it's just not going to happen, especially with Rosies. They just, they'll sit in a hole and you might get them to talk, but you're going to have a very small chance at killing that bull. So you wait a couple days, and you keep testing those waters. But what kind of elk behaviors or signs are you looking for when you locate a bull, and what kind of things can you tell or will help you make decisions on how to pursue that animal?
First thing we look at is basically wind direction right off the bat. And, I'm not trying to skirt around elk behavior, but, I know that's one thing you want to touch on, but I don't put a a whole lot of thought into elk behavior. I pay attention to it for sure, especially on, like you're saying, a bull that you've checked on and a bull kind of, all right, is he doing anything different than he was 2 days ago? But, first thing we do when we get a bull to respond, we'll basically check the wind and check the terrain, check our watch, and try to start to put this picture together on, what time of day is it? What's this elk going to be doing? What's the wind going to be doing if we go after it? And one thing that we've been doing that really helped a lot of times back when I first started archery elk hunting, we would kind of pick and choose. We're like, well, we don't really want to drop 1,000 feet after that bull, or he doesn't sound that big.
Yeah.
And we've been kind of fooled over and over. So as of late, we basically chase every bugle, as long as we're not going to have to, as long as there's not a bull 2,000 feet down below us or a bull 500 feet away from us, we may elect not to go after the one that's way down in the hole. But we're basically just trying to paint a picture when we hear a bull bugle and come up with a plan of attack and really hope that we got a really good, spot or a good pinpoint on his location to kind of plan our attack. But we assume that every elk that we hear bugle is a callable bull.
How much can you tell about that bugle as far as whether he has cows or not, and how much does that change your strategy?
As far as telling if they have cows, it's really tough. You can kind of gauge how big a bull is off the sound of his. But I've been fooled more times than not. Here's some little wimpy bull, and then you get down there and you see him. You visually see that bull bugle, and you're like, well, that doesn't match up.
Yeah.
But I think they all just kind of got their own, distinct bugles. If we hear that, if you hear a cow call, or if you can hear cows with that bull, if you can hear him glunking, some of that sort of stuff that you're not going to hear until it's close, it kind of changes the game a little bit. Just knowing that we really don't want to call until we get close, because we don't want to necessarily blow him out or give him a chance to leave. A herd bull is exponentially harder to kill than a satellite bull, even using the same tactics. So we usually try to get really close and be even more aggressive on a herd bull. It's kind of throwing all your eggs in one basket. Here's your chance if it's going to work out, and basically going for broke.
No, it's a great strategy because it also cuts down a lot of the time you spend chasing that elk.
Yeah, and that's my first. When we first started doing this and getting a couple hunting buddies, I told them, I was like, don't be mad at me, but we may bump elk, we may push elk, we may, and it's just, that's how I had kind of learned, because back when we learned, there was no books, there wasn't social media, there wasn't forums, there wasn't a whole lot of instructional information out there. And so I just kind of learned on my own. And like I said, whether it's because I don't got very much patience or what it is, but that was kind of the style that I had came up with. Like, it was fun, whether I was killing something every time or not, but it was just a fun way to hunt, and it turned out to be pretty effective, and so we kind of stuck with it. But I can remember one time back in 05 or 06, I was already tagged out, and I was calling for my buddy, and we had a big bull going, and we got a little too close and pushed him, and he was just ticked. It was like, we should have waited across the creek, and then it was like, just give him one, let's just keep at it. And we were able to call that bull in the 23 yards the next day, and by being aggressive and continuing to be aggressive.
Wow.
It's kind of like on a multiple choice test, you always just pick C, and eventually your probability is better. So we always stick with pretty much the same scenario on every call-in. Aggressive, get close. And
no, I think it's funny. Maybe it's just because we both cut our teeth on Roosevelts, and that's the strategy that Roosevelt hunters develop. But when it comes to locating, walk us through kind of your setup. I mean, are you coming out of the gate with just a bugle, or are you coming out with a cow call? I know you said once you locate a bull, you want to get as close to you as you can. But what's that look like when you're locating?
A locator bugle, I usually, sometimes I'll carry a designated locator reed that, I've got a signature locator, or a real heavy reed that's, going to reach a little bit farther, have a little more oomph down on the bottom of a canyon, or use one of my just normal bull calls. But what I'm trying to do is hit like a 2 or 3 note, really high pitched. and 95% of my locating is done on a bugle. There are some times where I'll use a cow call. If it's a bull we've played with a little bit before, maybe, something that leads me to not necessarily want to locate bugle. But my locator bugle is a 2 or 3 note, high note bugle. And I always tell people, you've got the right note when it just rattles your ears. And basically, you got that resonance that's rattling your ears. Yeah. And I try not to add a bunch of voice inflection, in the beginning. I try not to grunt it off at the end. It's just a real clean high note bugle. That we're trying to basically, my idea of a location bugle is to get that sound to as many places as I want to get it down the canyon. I want to get it across the canyon. And, so I'm probably a high volume caller, and I'm trying to get the most sound out of that location bugle.
How much time are you spending on a locate? Like, say you're working a ridge and you move along 300 yards and you want to locate into a hole. How much time are you spending? How many bugles are you putting into that area before you're moving again?
It's not. I can't necessarily say every single time. It depends on the sign you're seeing. The rubs. If I can smell elk, if I see fresh sign, I seem to put a lot more effort into it. It gets into that strategy on knowing, kind of being able to read the sign really quick and, finding the elk. But say on a typical ridge line where there's been elk in there within a day or two, on the ridge top, and they're either dropped into the hole, we may, that 200 to 300 yards, we're probably bugling or letting the topo kind of tell. If I know that there's a finger ridge coming up, it doesn't necessarily do me any good to bugle before it. I'll wait until I can broadcast that bugle down the other side. Ideally, we try to wait, 2 or 3 minutes after every location bugle to give something time to respond. Here, me being impatient, sometimes it's a minute and a half. I've got my hunting partner, Charlie. He has a friend that's killed some giant bulls in Idaho and New Mexico, and he swears by 15 minutes, before you move after it. And kind of going back to what I had said earlier, I want to find a bull that's temperature's already kind of cranked up and willing to play the game. That's my excuse anyways for not waiting any longer. Like, I want to find a bull that's fired up and continue to move. But, if I know that if there's heavy sign, heavy scent, heavy rub lines, I may locate 2 or 3 times from one area. And then I may, if I don't get anything, I may go into a challenge bugle, from that ridge line just to throw something different at it. And there were multiple times last year in the blues where the locator bugle didn't work, and if I didn't challenge bugle from there, I would have never located a bull.
Yeah,
so it's kind of a knack. Everybody only locate, but it's like if I can't get that thing to sound off, I'm never going to know he's there anyways.
Yeah, I had a situation last year. Actually, I tagged out in Idaho on a Saturday, so I bombed back all night, and I had 1 day left in Oregon. No idea where anything's been because I've been in Idaho for the last 10 days. And went into an area, usually elk in there. And I sat there and I was willing to shoot anything. I was like, hey, it's going to be a meat bull. I got about 4 hours left. And went in there and just cow called. And I bet I called for a half hour, 45 minutes before I got the slightest spike bugle, which, hey, great. I'll shoot a spike. It's the last day of season. And slowly, probably over the next half hour, started to realize that was a really big bull, and he just sounded small. And, that's it. It just took a long time. Yeah. I mean, there was a bull we called, he never left. He was in the same spot for 7 days, and we never went in there just because it was kind of out of the way. We had a lot more action on some different ridges, but he would only respond to a challenge bugle, and it was a really guttural, low sound. Didn't even really sound that elky, but that bull it was just kind of funny. You could sit there and locate bugle at that bull all day long, but until you challenge bugle at him, you'd have never know he was down in that deep dark basin. It's got to be a good one.
Yeah, that's what we said. We talk about trying to draw pictures on what you heard. We made the assumption, and we told the whole story without ever seeing this bull and only hear his bugle, that he was some old regress bull that had just holed up in there. And so she didn't want to go kill an old regress bull. Maybe that's just us making excuses for not going down there.
Yeah. So why don't you walk us through, we got a bull located now. Walk us through your strategy and what to do step by step here. Teach us how the pros do it.
Easy with that word. So we're saying we located them with audible locate, not glass.
Correct.
We audibly locate them. We can't really see them.
Yeah.
Okay. So, like we talked earlier a little bit, I'm trying to paint a picture right here off the bat, and I try not to overthink elk hunting, but here's a good point in the game to ask yourself some questions really quick so you can kind of make the best approach. What time is it? Is it early in the morning? Are these elk going from feeding grounds to bedding grounds? Are they in the transition zone? Is it the middle of the day? Should these elk be bedded up? Or is it starting to get later in the evening, and are these elk going from bedding to feeding back to the transition? They're the transition. So I'm asking myself that question. I'm asking myself, same thing that goes along with time of day. Your thermals, at least where we hunt, are almost, by the watch. As long as you don't got some weird weather systems moving through. So I'm trying to look at my watch, figure out what slope I'm on, what time of day it is, and if by the time I get down there, what the wind's going to be doing. So we're trying to make a good read on the wind. I'm trying to figure out what type of terrain he's in. Is he in the timbers? Are we going to pop out into an opening? Kind of how's the lay of the land set up? Can we make get close without being seen? So I'm trying to look for that. I'm looking for landmarks and trying to figure out where this bull is on my best guess within like a 100-yard circle from either that first bugle, or if we can get multiple bugles. A lot of times after you get this bull to bugle, he's going to bugle a couple more times, almost like he's checking up on you at that point. So you're trying to listen for that and get some better information.
Are you bugling to him and trying to get him to give his position a little bit better? I mean, a lot of times with that first bugle, you're not going to know precisely where he is. So
yeah. So from that first locator point, I'm going to assume, for this scenario, that we're far enough away that I don't feel that bugling anymore is going to hurt. He'll respond again in a minute or a half a minute. Mm-hmm. So if we didn't get a very good read on that first time, we'll bugle again, just a locator bugle from that point and really try to pinpoint his location. But from the point we locate that last time, from that location, I try not to bugle or even cow call anywhere in between. I'll talk about my Idaho bull here in a second, kind of a different strategy we had to use on that one and how it played out. So now I'm trying to make a read on where he's at. I'm trying to read the topography and the cover and get as close to that bull as I can. So I painted this little picture. I've asked myself 3 or 4 questions, kind of laid out, where these elk are going to go or where they should be, and then also try to figure out how long it's going to take me to get there and where the elk are going to be. Because a lot of times I've hunted with guys where they go right to where they heard that bull bugle, but now that bull's 30 minutes away because he's been feeding up the creek and out on the south slope, or something to that. So I'm trying to kind of paint this whole picture on where he's going to be and what's going to be happening when we get there. And then usually we just put our head down and, like I said, cross our fingers that he bugles a couple more times on our way. If not, we're going to get to where we thought we heard him and try to pick up some sign and kind of reevaluate the situation. So we get close, 80 to 100 yards. You've seen, everybody's watched the Primos videos, and you hear about people sending their collars back 35 to 40 yards. Our strategy is completely different, and I'll explain why. When you send a collar back, say you get to 100 yards and you send a collar back 40 to 50 yards, that collar, which is the threat to that bull, is now moved outside of that bubble that we've kind of found as an effective bubble to create that threat, right? So if you get the 100 to 100 yards, but your collar's back at 50 yards further, he's now 150 yards from the bull. And from just my experience hunting public land, pressured bulls, we've just kind of hurt our chances of calling that bull in for the collar. Yeah. So a lot of times we keep the collar, which is a / cameraman / whatever we've got going on. They usually stay within 5 or 10 yards of the hunter. That, and the other thing that it does, it gives the collar the ability to read the situation the same as the hunter. Instead of a collar 50 yards back, he doesn't know if that bull's standing there perfectly broadside for you, and he continues to call when you really want that thing, to sit still.
Yeah. I mean, how many times do you see that screw up a situation where the caller, doesn't know what's going on and, he can't see. So he's making guesses on what happens, or he walks up to you or whatever happens.
Yeah. And so that's our strategy. Now I will never ever say that, sending a collar back doesn't work, because I'm one of those guys that the proof's in the pudding. I've watched it hundreds of times, successfully done. People sending collars back, so it does work, and that's kind of where I step back from my strategy and say, use what works, but this is what I use, and you ultimately find something you're comfortable with and produces results. But yeah, I'm not one to say that it doesn't work, because I would be a fool, because it's been proven over and over. But our strategy kind of requires that collar to get close. Now, when we get within that, as closer the better. If I can get to within 60 yards and I can start to see his cows, the better and more effective our calling strategy is going to work. But basically, the picture we're painting for that bull is we start off with an estrus whine or a pleading sound. That bull doesn't necessarily know where all of his cows are, if they're feeding or in the timber. So we're painting the picture that one of his cows needs attention, whether it's checked up on, they're pleading, they're estrus whining, they're coming into cycle. And then we immediately follow that call up with a challenge bugle we've just painted the picture that there's one of your cows on the edge of your herd needs some attention, but now there's this other bull, whether it's a satellite bull or another herd bull, there to tend to her. And a lot of the situations, that's all we need, to kind of get things started. He's going to be fired up if he does respond, and then we're able to control the situation there with challenge bugles. And from that point forward, once he responds with a bugle, we don't typically cow call anymore on a cookie cutter setup. And the one rule about elk hunting is there are no rules. So you explain the strategy, and then it seems like every time you get in there and try to run this, some little tweak is done, and you change up. But in an ideal world, in a cookie cutter situation, that's basically what we do: get in close, estrus whine, challenge bugle, and then continue the challenge bugle. And the one strategy I get asked a lot, if anybody's ever watched some of the the YouTube videos I put together, is we use a lot of mimicry, and that is basically in my opinion, like, I don't have a clue what the elk are saying or what it means to them, but it seems to have it flips a switch and turns the heat up on that bull by being able to just crank it up. You're basically stepping on everything that he says over and over. And if I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I love the kids to death, but there's nothing that gets me more fired up than a minute or two of being mimicked over and over, and playing copycat. So I'm just assuming that the elk have got to feel the same way.
So what's your thoughts on chuckles? I mean, I come from hunting Rosies, and I know absolutely chuckles are everything when it comes to Roosevelts. Do you use that for Rockies as well, or what's your thoughts on chuckles?
I grunt a lot. Chuckle, grunt, and don't ask me to define that. I've got an idea what the difference is for calling on stage, but in the elk world, I don't know what the difference is. I do grunt a lot on the end of my challenge bugle, and I think that just kind of adds to that slap in the face and turning the heat up. I feel that it kind of adds to the aggression of the bugle, and kind of takes up more time. That other bull's thinking, well, he's bugling, he's displaying himself, he's making more noise than I am, and it kind of seems to continue to turn that temperature up.
So if that bull starts rubbing, are you going to mimic him on that aspect too, or what's your thoughts on raking trees and rubbing?
Yeah, I mean, we won't. A lot of times we use raking trees as a chance to move, closer. If we catch a bull raking and he doesn't have a real good sight on, we may move 10 or 15 yards as quick as we can, and get a little bit closer. Now, we do rake, stomp, crack sticks a ton, whether it's called for or not. A lot of times, especially if you feel like that bull's getting sticky and you're like, man, I cannot move him from, 80 yards or 100 yards, and he's just really holed up. A lot of times you'll see us in the videos, or just we'll be throwing sticks. The caller will get the idea, like, we need to rake or we need to rub. Mm-hmm. And so he'll find a stick and throw it over. We'll turn to our caller who's only 5 or 10 yards away and make the sign to start raking something. And so we use that a lot. Just creating natural sound, breaking sticks over our knees, just smacking them against small trees or whatever we've got, rolling rocks, stomping the ground, trying to add to the realism of the situation to kind of paint a picture for that bull.
Well, that's where it helps. That's where it helps too, to have your caller right next to you, because you can communicate really well. And sometimes you need that, or you need to move, and he needs to know that you're moving, and things like that.
Yeah, no, it's great, and I to go back on chuckling and grunting just a little bit, yeah, I have to laugh because hunting Roosevelt's, it's a guarantee that 90% of your elk are going to chuckle or grunt, or maybe not even do the high pitched part of the bugle. You know, a lot of times you only get chuckles or grunts. I don't know, what it is, and I have to laugh on some of the competition calling I've done. Is I've got notes back that says you grunt and chuckle too much, and I should get extra points. Cutting my teeth on Roosevelt hunting. That's just what we did on all of our bugles. You just add it to the end.
Oh, so true. And you probably see it in mine too. And that's the same way. You cut your teeth on Roosevelt's, you learn to chuckle, because them bulls chuckle. Like you said, they'll only chuckle. There's bulls, I've called multiple bulls that never even heard them bugle, or, just a grunt or a growl and a chuckle and do a lot of raking. So it's completely different.
Yep.
So as you're hunting here, let's go through a little bit of your calls and what kind of calls you're carrying with you on your average hunt.
Okay, I'll start as a progression. Back in 2012 when I started, I hadn't learned everything I do now. I would carry separate locators and separate cow calls and separate bull calls. And so now I'm basically carrying, I'll let you know what calls I'm using. I'm using like the Boss and the Dragon Slayer are the two calls that I always have. They may not be the best cow call for a competition. You may not get the best tones out of those for cow calls, but they'll easily make realistic cow sounds, really easy to use. But the Boss and the Dragon Slayer, which are the two calls that I make, those calls allow me to do everything. They allow me to locator bugle, send location bugles. They allow me to challenge bugle, do all the cow calls. And so typically, those are the two diaphragms that I'm carrying, one or the other. I've always got, a Wood Easy Estrus around. It's a louder cow call. And there's something about that call that sometimes will get a bull going where, my cow calls off of a diaphragm won't. It's got a different, almost like I describe it as like a 3D buzz, like you can almost feel the sound, if that makes any sense at all. So it's just got like a 3D sound to it. It's kind of, you can feel it. It's loud and it seems to be really effective. And then of course we carry a grunt tube. So I keep it really simple. A couple diaphragms, a wood call, and then a tube is basically what I've got on me. And I pick a diaphragm, a couple diaphragms out that I can do everything on.
Now, you kind of have the bat design for the bugle. I know. Do you use that exclusively, or do you have a couple different tubes, or what's your standard hunting tube look like?
My tube is the modified, my Phelps locatable, I think is what it's called. It is basically just a modified, bat. And there's a couple, I'll go through the reasons why I elect to carry a larger bat or a tube with me in the woods. First of all, it adds volume. It's got a big, large chamber. I can add volume to it, and I can reach, if I can reach a bull that I couldn't reach with a smaller tube, I'm going to pack it. It's the other thing I like is the resonance. It's realistic sounding. It's got the right amount of resonance, and it just sounds good. And I can't say one way or the other. I've heard some really bad, elk calls from real elk. I've heard some really bad elk callers, which are people that are still very successful. And so I don't put a whole bunch of weight into that, but I guess it's just me wanting to be as good as I can. And whether I've got to mimic, a bull that sounds like garbage up on the hill, or, a bull that sounds like a world champion elk caller, I want to be able to have the ability in that tube. And, ultimately that tube's almost as light as some of the other tubes, so I don't get too hung up on the weight. The one downside is the volume, of a big 4-inch diameter wiffle ball bat, and it's about 2 feet long. But I don't ever, besides the hike in or the hike out, if I'm bivvying out, that tube is I got my bow in one hand and that tube's in the other the entire hunt.
Yeah.
So it's really not that big of an issue for me. But yeah, I do like carrying a big tube.
Yeah, I carry a big tube as well, and I can honestly say I think there's a difference when you're chasing big bulls on what you sound like. I think those big bulls could care less if you sound like a small bull. I lost my bat one year just hiking through the woods, and the string came off, so I lost it, and I had to go to town, and all they had was a Terminator tube. and I could not call a bull in to save my life, and those bulls would just turn and walk away from me. Like they didn't care. I was just a little bull trying to scream at him, and I thought, oh, never again will I only have one bat when I'm.
Yeah. That's I get the question a lot. If I'm at a sportsman show or a consumer show, and I got guys coming up to me saying, well, I want to sound like a little bull. What diaphragms do you have that let me sound like a little bull? And you don't want to scare a customer away, but I was like, why would you want to sound like a little bull? And and then we go through a little spiel, and it's like, I'm not like I said earlier. If it works for you, continue to do it. But everybody that I've talked to, just like you're saying, some of the guys that I know that are really good elk hunters, they never ever try to sound like some of these guys are going out 100% full bore, as big of a bull as they can sound, and that's their that's their calling from start to finish. They don't change from it.
Having said that, though, I think that you're not going to see nearly as many raghorns when you sound big.
Yeah.
So it depends on what you're looking for. And if you're looking for any bull, I would not recommend going big, because you're going to intimidate a lot of elk.
Yeah, I guess I should say that if I seen a decent satellite across the canyon, I probably wouldn't go get 100 yards from him and scream, as big and loud as I can. So I guess there are some times when I wouldn't want to sound that big, but the big tube I can still, if I didn't think I could just cow call that bull in, I have the ability to sound like a smaller bull with the big tube.
So to take it back down to a little bit of 101 level, because I'm sure there's a lot of people listening that are, want to get into elk hunting or have never elk hunted. What's the one thing they should learn about elk hunting or about elk calling that'll make them more successful out there?
The one thing, just, confidence. I always say, find a call that you're confident with. If you're not confident with, in the middle of your living room or at your house, you're not going to be able to go out in the heat of the moment and make a good elk call. So whether it's my calls, whether it's beagling bull, whether it's primos, whether, whatever call you use, become proficient with it and have extreme confidence in that call. Be able to, first off, make a good locator bugle. If without being able to use a locator bugle, I wouldn't have probably 85% of the startups as far as a hunt starting up at that point. So I recommend being able to locate bugle, being able to challenge bugle, and then being able to create some sort of a pleading cow sound, even if it's just a mew. But yeah, if you can kind of, and that's the thing, we have enough time now where you got 5 months. Now is the time to practice, because I've seen people learn how to elk call in 2 days. And I've seen somebody that's had to try every day for 4 months before they finally got good enough to go out in the woods. So practice, and you're not going to know if you're not a very good elk caller and you pick up some new calls a week or two before season, chances are you're not going to be a good elk caller when season comes around.
So what's a good strategy? Say I'm a rifle hunter, I want to get into bow hunting, and I want to go out there and I want to experience this whole calling aspect of it. And I get my cow calls down, I get my locates down. How much does that change everything? And I get out in the woods, how do I go about it? If I can only cow call a little bit and I can locate, what's that look like?
I mean, if you can only locate and cow call, and you're coming in from that's a lot of guys. They can only use like a wood external, cow call, and they can maybe rip on a Primos Terminator, a locator. I would still, just because I feel if you're getting close, I mean, ultimately in archery hunt, we have to get close to get a shot, right? So my strategy would still be to, if you can't find a bull locating on his own, because these elk will bugle on their own if they're getting pestered by satellite bulls or, other herd bulls or whatever, try to use the elk talking on their own to get things started. And then if not, I would probably switch to, your locator. And then once you locate a bull, I would still get close and then, either try to coax him away with a cow call. I'm not saying that our strategy, I would basically just take our strategy that I laid out earlier and basically just not have a challenge bugle involved. Get close, cow call, and maybe even locate or bugle at him when you're that close.
Yeah.
But I just think that real simple system that we use is almost fail proof, regardless of your skill as a caller.
Nice. Well, Do you have any recommendations on areas? Say a guy wanted to come out for his first elk hunt. What states do you recommend for over the counter?
Are we talking like somebody from way back east? If
elk isn't your main thing, and you want to come out and hunt elk, is it possible to hunt over the counter, without a guide, or would you recommend that?
Yeah, I highly recommend it. If with the caveat that you may not be 100% successful, but if you're a guy that doesn't necessarily want have the money or want to pony up the money and are just looking for a good experience, I highly recommend coming out and doing it. And last year was the first year I hunted Idaho and had a great time without really knowing anything. As far as areas, Washington, I probably wouldn't recommend if you're putting money in. I'm not trying to throw dirt at your state either, but Oregon, if you're trying to come out on a relatively low budget and kill a Roosevelt, Oregon's a great state. Even for Rockies on the east side, Idaho and Montana has some amazing opportunities, as well as Colorado. As far as so I would say if you're going to come out here, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and Colorado are probably the 4 states that are going to be on your radar. And then if you want to hunt Roosevelts, you're probably going to pick Oregon over Washington every time. And then, depending on, if you want to hunt deer as well, Montana may be the choice, because for just a little bit more, you can, tack on a deer tag. And then Colorado's the closest for a lot of guys coming from out east, so that seems to be the state that gets, the majority of the pressure. Not to mention their elk herd is 5 times bigger than Oregon's.
And that's true. And the good thing about Oregon, though, is over the counter, you get a full month to do it. And and if you don't have the assets to hire a guide, the time is your best bet. And spend 2 weeks doing it, and in 2 weeks you'll learn a lot.
Yep. Yeah. No. And anybody that's wanting to come out that's never elk hunted, here in the last 6-7 years. YouTube is your best friend. Social media, everybody's posting up hunts. You get a good idea on what it's going to be like, and before you get here, I recommend watching as many videos as you can. I would say be careful. Try to weed through some of the special hunt permit hunts, because and try to find some of the guys that are hunting public land DIY. I'm making the assumption that's the kind of hunt they're going to be on, and kind of see what it takes.
So, speaking of resources in YouTube, do you have any good YouTube videos on how to call?
I don't. I've put a few hunting videos together, and I've kind of displayed some of my calls for people, but I've really been slacking on the video side as far as putting together some instructionals or what each call sounds like.
So, where's a good place people can find out more about your calls and everything you're working on?
We've got the website, which is www.phelpsgamecalls.com. I'm on Facebook, both personally and as a business, Phelps Game Calls and Jason Phelps, and then also on Instagram as Phelps Game Calls. So we try to pay attention to social media, and if anybody ever has any questions, they feel free to get a hold of me.
Yeah, Jason is a great resource and is definitely on it and answers a lot of questions on there. So if you have questions, he's a great person to ask. So, Jason, you got any big hunts planned this fall, or what do you got planned?
Right now, we'll wait for our draws. This is going to be the first year I put in for the east side. We have in Washington, you have to pick west or east, and then in order to hunt the east side, you have to draw a bull tag. So I'll put in for there and kind of see what the results are, and then if not, we're looking at probably Idaho over the counter and potentially Montana over the counter. As far as elk, and then Nevada, I'm hoping to finally draw a Nevada mule deer tag, but we'll see how that goes.
So outside of elk and outside of culling elk, what's your favorite animal to hunt?
Besides elk, it's definitely mule deer. I grew up hunting blacktail, and I hate the brush. I hate the wet. It's like I'd much rather go play in the snow on the east side and hunt mule deer in any of the other states that have mule deer than try to find one of these blacktail.
Well, that Nevada mule deer hunt's going to be a hot one. That's an early season.
Yeah. We'll see which tag we draw. The nice thing about Nevada, they give you the ability to put in for any weapon in all the seasons. So we'll put a couple real good ones up top and kind of see what we draw.
Well, nice. Well, good luck to you in all the draws throughout the states. And thanks for chatting with us and giving us a little heads up and a couple tips on calling elk.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All righty, Jason. We'll talk to you later.
Yeah, talk to you later. Have a good one.
Hey guys, thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show and maybe even picked up a few tips along the way. Join us right here every Thursday morning for more interviews and great hunting tips. And be sure to help us out by leaving a review on iTunes. For more information about this show and the rest of our guests, check out the show notes for links and additional resources on our website, www.therichoutdoors.net.